Yeah, hi folks. Yes, New Zealand has been hijacked by radicals, and it has been going on for a long time now. But lately, the onslaught has been so extreme, it can no longer be disputed. In the last couple of years, we've seen Maori wards on councils, the separatist Maori Health Authority, Maori control over Three Waters, Hepuapua, and now these extremists want to change the name of New Zealand to Aotearoa and force Te Reo down our throats. But first, fake Ardern.
I know there will be many, many New Zealanders who share my deep sadness today.
My deep sadness, my ass.
What interactions have you had with King Charles? Have you had conversations with him, and do you have sort of some thoughts on him?
Yeah, actually, I've been lucky enough to have many interactions with King Charles. The King, like his mother, has a deep love for New Zealand. He also has a passion for the environment. He's spoken of climate change long before it became the global focus that it needed to be.
Now, I thought this was about the Queen, not about climate change.
He also has a deep commitment to the well-being of young people and has a number of programs that have been in New Zealand as a result of that. I know that he will continue that affinity for Aotearoa.
Affinity for Aotearoa. So now she insults a queen with the name Aotearoa.
There were a lot of New Zealanders who are waking up sort of very shocked this morning, and who, have only known Queen Elizabeth as their monarch. What's your message to those New Zealanders who are sort of feeling that sense of shock and sadness?
I feel very similar emotions, both at the same time feeling a sense of deep sadness, but also deep gratitude. Here is a woman who gave her life utterly to the service of others. And regardless what anyone thinks of the role of monarchies around the world, there is undeniably, I think here, a display of someone who gave everything on behalf of her people, and her people included the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Aotearoa, New Zealand. Again, she insults the Crown. Nowhere in the treaty is the name Aotearoa mentioned, but New Zealand clearly is.
Kia ora anō. Complaints to broadcasters about the use of Te Reo Māori have escalated this year, but the Broadcasting Standards Authority says that's because use of the language is becoming more widespread.
No, the use of the language is not becoming more widespread. It has simply been forced down our throats by you.
Our Māori Affairs reporter Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui reports.
It's flowing on our airwaves and being embraced on our screens.
Embraced by whom? Embraced by you.
On air, Te Reo Māori is booming. It is. But as broadcasters kōrero Māori more than ever, a trend has emerged. The Broadcasting Standards Authority has received nearly 80 queries about its use this year. Most years it only receives about 3 or 4.
Most of the people are simply saying that they just don't like the use of Te Reo on air. It's as simple as that. Mainly I think it's just that Te Reo is more prevalent, the use is more prevalent. Some people find that challenging.
No, it's not challenging. People are simply sick of it.
The objections are something RNZ's midday presenter is familiar with.
If you want more Māori spoken in New Zealand, then quit broadcasting.
Messages like this landing in her inbox almost every day.
I was warned that was going to happen, but for me it's about the kaupapa. It's about making sure that our reo is always heard.
The Māori Language Commission says disruptions caused by the pandemic are making people lash out.
And it's easier to look for things that may not have gotten you that wound up and get wound up over them. And Te Reo was one of those things.
Absolute garbage.
Research it's commissioned suggests more New Zealanders than ever value the language.
What percent?
New Zealand's public broadcaster is facing backlash after part of a weather bulletin was read in Maori. The use of the country's national language is widely embraced.
No, it's not.
But complaints are increasing.
It's a national weather report that divided a population.
And in Atamaki, Makaurau, Auckland, a few showers, mainly north of the city. However, tikina atu tō hamarara, keep that umbrella nearby.
That report aired on New Zealand's public broadcaster in July, but a similar bulletin this week has drawn criticism. Broadcaster Te Reo Brown presented the weather in Te Reo Maori and English.
And in Te Whanganui o Aotearoa, more of the same here. He rangi ka Hepuapua, some high cloud and some light winds for a change, a high of 12.
But despite using both names for major cities, some viewers took offence. One person wrote on Facebook, "I am listening to the weather forecast. I have little idea of what the presenter is saying. This is a disgrace. This is New Zealand, not Rarotonga." Another said, "As an important source of information for all New Zealanders, I find it irresponsible for media to cater for minority." While another viewer was more assertive, saying, "I will not watch the news on One anymore. I am sick of having Te Reo shoved down my throat to appease 17% of the population."
Exactly.
Also, we live in New Zealand, not Aotearoa.
But sadly, the Maori Party didn't get that memo.
First of all, Aotearoa means long white cloud. It's a part of us as tangata whenua, the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, and it actually is the original name.
No, it's not.
But it would be a giant fraud to suggest that Aotearoa as a standalone name was somehow the Māori created name for all of New Zealand. It never was. And only in modern times have Māori adopted it as the Māori name for the country. My approach will be poo-pooed as politically incorrect by the treaty rent-a-crowd gatecrashers, but I'm at this party too, and so are you, and every other New Zealander is. So here are some facts to dampen their breathless activist rants. The word Aotearoa was selected and popularised as the Māori name for New Zealand by, wait for this, Pākehā writers William Pember Reeves and Stevenson Percy Smith. Next, it was used in the Education Department School Journal. Bang, it went there, flourished from there. Aotearoa was never used by early Māori to describe New Zealand. Māori were a collection of tribes. They did not have a need or a concept of nation. It wasn't a country with a name, it was a collection of tribes across the islands.
And of course, the Maori Party wants co-governance as well.
The government is finally about to start wider consultation on the controversial Hepuapua report.
So you remember the report was written so that Aotearoa New Zealand can meet its obligations to Indigenous New Zealanders in the eyes of the UN.
Its authors call it a roadmap to fair power sharing between Māori and Pākehā.
The Axe Party says it heralds the end of liberal democracy and one person, one vote.
So, what does Te Pāti Māori say to that? Tauti mai, welcome to the program, co-leader Debbie Ngarewa Peka tēnā koe mōrena. Is the ACT Party right? Does governance mean the end to universal suffrage, one person, one vote?
No, they're not right on many things, but particularly this one they've got tragically wrong. And I guess, it's really unclear from, their debate on which part of what's been proposed is not going to work for them, and which part of what's been proposed. This is a party that complains about spending millions of dollars in inequities and addressing Māori inequities. If we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting what we get. So this is a better future-focused way of investing in inequities.
All right, so what does co-governance look like to Te Pāti Māori?
Now, what a stupid question. It's about 17% of the population getting at least 50% control of New Zealand. And here's some of the other radicals who want the same. And as you can see, we're not only getting language forced down our throats. Now folks, I'll finish today with a sample of an interview between Peter Williams and Ewan McQueen, the author of the book One Sun in the Sky, which exposed the truth about the treaty. and hat tip to Peter Rhodes for this one.
Yeah, well, for many years, Peter, I've been concerned about, the development of what I call in the book the dual sovereignty paradigm of treaty interpretation. Look, I want, unlike many New Zealanders, I want to have good race relations in New Zealand. I want there to be unity in our country. But I also think unity is built on truth. And, in the last 30 years, we've had to face some pretty difficult truths about what's happened in our past, and the treaty settlements journey has been part of that. And I'm reasonably comfortable and think it's been a great thing that many of the injustices that Maori have suffered over the years are now being addressed or have been addressed, and many good things have come from that. So I'm generally a supporter of the treaty settlements process. It's not perfect, but I think it's been something good for New Zealand. However, at the same time, over the last 30 years, in parallel almost, there has been this development of a different way of interpreting what the treaty means in terms of sovereignty. And, I suppose many years ago, I saw that and I thought, gee, I'm not sure that actually reflects what the treaty was about. The idea that the treaty was an equal power sharing arrangement where the governor was to govern over Pākehā and the chiefs were to maintain full sovereign independence and govern over themselves. That's the modern dual sovereignty paradigm as defined by the Waitangi Tribunal, 2014. But it's been developing for some time, and it's now pretty much the dominant paradigm or the dominant narrative about the treaty. But when I first came across this some years ago, I thought, I don't think that sounds like it's going to be good for race relations. I can't see how you can have two sovereignties in one country. And B, and perhaps more importantly, I didn't see how that it reflected what the treaty was. From what I knew of the treaty and from what I knew of the historical background to it, that was not what was agreed at Waitangi in 1840. So I set out to write the book, looking at the historical evidence for how the treaty was in fact understood on the sovereignty issue. And I suppose when I set out, it was for most people, because I've written this book over the last, I wrote it from 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, I think I published it. So it was a bit of a long write. But at the time when I set out, for most New Zealanders, I suppose it was more of an academic issue. It wasn't really on the it didn't have the high profile that it does now. But I knew that, when you're dealing with issues of this nature, ideas always have consequences. And I could see that coming up, if this dual sovereignty paradigm was flourished further and came to the fore in our country, there would be trouble. And so I figured we really needed to get the evidence out about how the treaty was actually understood when it was first written and agreed to, hence the book. And it's interesting that pretty much as soon as I published the book, that was late 2020, things really did heat up on this front politically. The issue did come to the fore.
Indeed. So could we just go back to just summarise what you've said there? Would I be correct in saying your thesis seems to be that, far from suggesting partnership, co-governance, dual sovereignty, call it what you want, as the modern interpretation of the treaty seems to be, you're saying the treaty should be read and interpreted in its entirety. That is, the preamble and Articles 1, 2 and 3, and it doesn't really matter whether you read the English version or the Te Reo version.
Yeah, that's true. I think for 150 years, pretty much, it was generally accepted by both European and Maori leaders that the treaty established the sovereignty of the Crown over all New Zealanders. The preeminent governing authority in New Zealand was the Crown.
And that's Article 1, isn't it?
Yes, but as you say, you need to read the whole treaty. And I think this is where the dual sovereignty paradigm has arisen. People have very much had tunnel vision on Article 2, which of course talks about chieftainship, guaranteed.
Yeah, rangatiratanga in the Maori version, isn't
exactly.
it?
Yeah, exactly, tēnā rangatiratanga. But you can't focus simply on Article 2. The treaty is as you say, it's a preamble, it's Article 1, and it's Article 2, and it's Article 3. And the preamble sets out very clearly that the Queen's government, Te Kawanatanga o Te Queen, is to be established in New Zealand to deal with the problem of lawlessness, which applies to both Maori and Pākehā alike.
And we have to realise what was going on in New Zealand in 1840, because for the previous 40 years we had what are known today as the Musket Wars. And they, in fact, resulted in far more fatalities than any other subsequent conflicts in New Zealand during the land wars, the New Zealand wars of the 1840s, 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I mean, the Musket Wars, I think the historians estimate between 20 and 30,000 people died. In the land wars, 1860, there was 3,000. So there's a factor of 10 issue there. And the Musket Wars were very much intertribal wars in the 1820s.
So there was lawlessness in the country, and there had been some visits by chiefs, by Rangatira to Britain to see the then king, King William, and there'd also been contact, I think, in Australia, hadn't there? So there had been some Maori chiefs who had seen how good British law could be if applied properly.
Absolutely, and it also that interaction also meant that they understood what sovereignty was in terms of this is how the British governed, and they would have known full well that that this was not a partnership arrangement. Where the Crown governed, it was the preeminent governing authority. And I would say too that the Musket Wars were predominantly the 1820s. Over the 1830s, there was another big change in New Zealand, and that was sort of the outbreak, I would say, of Christian faith among many Maori, and that also laid the platform for what followed in the treaty as well, because many saw the British Crown as Christian, in quote marks, civilization, and so now they wanted that as well, having taken on the Christian faith. So you can't underestimate how important that was too. But coming back to the text, there's a lot of focus on the text of the treaty these days, and in particular the argument around the two words kawanatanga versus rangatiratanga, and what those two words mean. And the common argument is that kawanatanga is not really meaning sovereignty. It's a lesser word. It only means governance. Well, the last time I looked, that's what sovereigns do. They govern. So
you're essentially saying they're one and the same thing. And the Kawanatanga translation, as recently as 1986 by Sir Hugh Kaufuru, basically said that Kawanatanga is governance or government, isn't it?
Yes, well, Article 1 of the treaty, in the Te Reo version, when you back translate it into English, and this, as you say, it was back translated by Professor Sir Hugh Kaufuru, says in basically this, that the chiefs agreed to give absolutely to the Queen of England forever the complete government over their land. Now, when I quote that, people often say, "Oh, yes, but that's the English version. You can't use that." And I say to them, "Well, actually, no, it's not the English version. That's the Te Reo version, back translated into English by Professor Sir Hugh Kaufuru." So,
now I'll stop it there, and folks, I've posted a link to this below.